Good morning, everyone. I'm just making sure that we're recording here. Okay. Good morning, hello, and welcome to the November morning meetup of the Arts and Culture Accessibility Cooperative, the importance of internal training. My name is Megan Harms, and I'm the Arts and Culture Coordinator with Mind's Eye, and I will be your facilitator today. I am a white woman in my early 40s with long gray hair, and the webinar will begin shortly. We're going to give it a few minutes for everybody to come in. We're going to get started in just a second. Just some housekeeping. This webinar will be recorded. The recording will be emailed to all registrants in a few days. Along with the recording, you'll also receive a list of resources and a survey. The video will also be available on Mind's Eye's YouTube channel. Today, we'll be using the Q&A box as well as the raise your hand function. Please feel free to go ahead and drop your questions into the Q&A box throughout the presentation, and we'll try to get through as many of those as we can. During the Q&A time, you may raise your hand if you would like to speak, and we'll give you permission to turn on your microphones. That is on Windows, that's Alt-Y, and Mac, that's an Option-Y. Closed captions are available via Communication Access Real-Time Translation. Just select the CC button on the bottom toolbar. We also have American Sign Language interpreters with us. They will be spotlighted to ensure they remain on screen throughout the webinar and for the recording. So for best viewing, we recommend hiding non-video participants by clicking the 3 dots on any participant box. And you can also pin the interpreters to make sure they stay on your screen. And you want to look for David and Candace to pin. And if you want to see everybody, just switch over to gallery view. Live audio description is also available. Just click the interpretation button near the closed caption button on the bottom of your screen and choose audio description as the language. And just a reminder that to use audio description, it's an interpreter function. So you have to join the meeting audio through your computer. You can't listen to language interpretation if you use Dial-In or Call Me. Chat to everyone has been disabled due to its interference with screen readers, but you can still chat directly with the panelists or to me as the host. And as I mentioned, you will receive a survey. Please take a second to fill that out. You'll get it directly from Zoom, and then I'll also send it in the feedback or in the resources later. So please take a few minutes to fill that out. It's really important for our funders to know why we do this. And if you aren't already a member of our Facebook group, you can find us at facebook.com/groups/ACACSTL. We would like to acknowledge that Mind's Eye is located in Belleville, Illinois, the ancestral lands of many people, including the tribes commonly known as the Sioux, Quapaw, Miamia, Osage, Kaskaskia, and Kickapoo. We also acknowledge those tribes who pass near our area during their forced removal, including the Cherokee, Delaware, Sac and Fox, and Shawnee. The process of knowing and acknowledging the ground beneath our feet is a way of honoring and expressing gratitude for the people on this land before us. And this is a map of the St. Louis area with several overlapping colors, and each represent a different tribe that lived on this land before us. And you can find the interactive maps at native-land.ca. And now I would like to introduce our moderator for today. Lauren Diamond is the Visitor Services and Membership Coordinator at the Mildred Lane Kemper Art Museum at Washington University in St. Louis, where she has worked for 10 years. For most of her professional career, Lauren has worked in customer service, training and coordinating frontline staff to provide engaging, inclusive, and warm experiences. She has a BA in Arts and Sciences with a specialization in art history from St. Louis University and an MA in liberal arts from Washington University in St. Louis. She loves pasta and traveling, sports, and her dogs Ketchup and Mustard, who I hope make an appearance today. That would be great if we can see them at some point. And now I'll introduce our presenter, Paula Berner. Paula is a retired special education music teacher. Paula taught students with disabilities for 31 years, 28 of those years with the Special School District of St. Louis County. For her last 20 years of teaching, Paula taught music to students at Litzinger School. Paula has been a big proponent of sensory-friendly opportunities. She's worked closely with Opera Theater St. Louis and Stages St. Louis and provides sensory awareness training to the musical artists and staff prior to sensory-friendly performances. Paula is also the Special Projects Coordinator for the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra's sensory-friendly concerts. Paula has been recognized for work in her field. She was chosen as Special School District's Teacher of the Year in 2004. In 2005, she was one of 6 finalists for Missouri Teacher of the Year, and that same year received the Emerson Excellence in Education Award. In 2007, Paula was a Founders Award recipient from Fontbonne University, and in 2014, she was chosen as the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra's Educator of the Year. Paula sits on the boards of Stages, St. Louis, Carney's Kids Foundation, and the Otera Corporation in Colorado. So thank you, Paula and Lauren, for being here today. I'm going to turn off my camera and turn it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Megan, if you wouldn't let me share my screen, so I'll start our presentation. All right, Paula, all you.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Paula Berner. I am a white woman in my late 50s with shoulder length red hair. I am really honored to be a part of today's presentation, and let's get started. On our first screen, on the cover slide of the presentation, is the text with the title of the presentation and my name, and the title is Sensory Awareness Training. In the upper right-hand corner of the slide is a pink square with a quote and 6 flowers, 3 red, 2 yellow, and 1 purple flower. And the quote reads, "When a flower doesn't bloom, you change the environment in which it grows, not the flower." And that quote is by Alexander Den Heijer, who is a Dutch inspirational speaker, trainer, and consultant. And in the bottom right-hand corner of the slide is the Mind's Eye logo. Next. Everyone is a sensory being. Everything that we do is ruled by our senses. Think about that for just a moment. Everything that we do is ruled by our senses. Next. On this next slide is a cartoon graphic with a lady in her bed just waking up. She is wearing pink pajamas. Her arms are stretched upward and her mouth is open as if she is yawning. The bed is in front of a window, and outside the window is a yellow sunflower and a smiling rooster. There's a chair with a pair of pants and shirt hanging over it that is sitting in the corner of the room near the end of her bed. And then there's a picture hanging on the wall above the bed that looks like a ship sailing into the sunset. So right now, what I'd like for everyone to do is think about the very first minute of your day. How many of your senses engaged within those first few moments upon awakening? Just think about that for a minute. So when I think about my first minute of the day, I think about my sight. I open my eyes up and hopefully I see the sunshine, or I see my partner Gilbert, or I see my darling Puggle DJ. When I think about my sense of smell, I'm hopeful that I smell a cup of coffee. When I think about taste, well, that's not so pleasant because taste, we all kind of have gross breath in the morning. So I can't wait to get to the bathroom to brush my teeth. When I think about touch, I think about those warm covers on my body and how I'm not necessarily looking forward to getting out of that warm, comfy, cozy bed. And then of course, sound, it's probably the alarm clock. That is probably the very first sense that engages within those first few moments upon awakening. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that within the first minute of each of our days, we've already got senses that are engaging. Going back to, we are all sensory beings. Everything that we do is ruled by our senses. All right, next slide. So on this next slide, there are 7 different colored, 7-sided shapes. Those are called heptagons. I just learned that myself. There is an illustration in each heptagon representing one of the 7 senses. And yes, there are 7 senses. We're going to learn about the other 2 lesser known senses in just a moment. So there is an eye and a purple heptagon that represents sight. There is an ear in a blue heptagon that represents hearing. There is a nose in an aqua heptagon that is representing smell. A set of lips in a light green heptagon that represents sound. There is a pointing finger in a red heptagon that represents touch. A stick figure on a swing in a brown heptagon that represents vestibular. And then there's a stick figure that looks like it is dancing or kicking in a yellow heptagon that represents proprioceptive. So most of us are aware of the 5 most common senses that we just talked about: sight, smell, taste, sound, and touch. However, there are 2 lesser known senses. And the first one is vestibular. And vestibular is the sense that has to do with our body's balance or movement. The second lesser known sense is proprioceptive, and that's body awareness. So that kind of helps you gauge, like when you're kicking a ball, you're aware of your body so that you're not blasting that ball across a fence, or you're not blasting that ball into someone's face. It also has to do with like how hard we push or pull the door open. It's just being aware of your body in space. The vestibular, that sense, it has everything to do with your movement. It has everything to do with your balance. So those are the 2 additional senses that are part of our sensory systems. All right, next slide, please. So today we are going to talk about a little bit about sensory processing disorder. And the picture on this slide is a solid blue outline of a human profile of someone's head and face. There is a highlighted area on the head that is white with blue curvy lines that represent the brain. So What is a sensory processing disorder? And that is also known as SPD. The acronym is SPD. Sensory processing disorder is a condition in which the brain has trouble receiving and responding to information that comes in through all of our senses. This can present problems that can be tough on those who battle SPD, and it can also get in the way of people functioning effectively or learning or making friends. And just a side note, you will hear me oftentimes referring to children in this presentation. Obviously, the presentation that I do for many of our arts organizations is in preparation for events that they are preparing to present to children. And I think it's also important for you to know that it is more common for children to battle SPD or any sort of sensory challenges. So I will probably more often be referring to child or children in this presentation. So next slide, please. So right now, I am going to share with you a video, and it is a child's perception of what it is to have sensory processing disorder. And I have in preparations for my presentation, I have done much research on the resources available, and I have found nothing that is more effective in describing what it is to have SPD from a child's perspective. So give me just a moment. I'm going to share my screen and the video.
Hi, my name is Neil. I like classical music. I like to read comics.
A young boy talks with another student.
Something that I know a lot about and want to tell you about is sensory processing disorder. SPD is when the messages that your brain gets from your senses are not organized, so you don't respond to things like most people do. This makes it hard to do everyday life stuff like getting ready for the day, going to school, eating, and playing. You can have SPD by itself, or you can have it with other things like autism. I have autism and SPD. Everyone has 7 sensory systems. They are sound, taste, smell, vision, touch, proprioceptive, and vestibular.
A cartoon on screen outlines the 7 senses.
Under-responsive versus over-responsive. You can think of your sensory systems as being a cup, and water is that type of a sensory input. If you are under-responsive to a certain sensory input, it is like you're a big, huge cup. You keep getting water to the big cup. You can just keep adding, but it never feels full. But if you are over-responsive, it is like you are a tiny cup. All you need is just a little sensory input and you overflow. You want your cup to be full and not spill over. Each of your sensory systems is their own cup and they are different sizes. Just because you have one big cup does not mean you are under-responsive with all your senses. I have a big cup for my proprioceptive and vestibular senses and a little cup for my touch, sound, taste, and smell senses. Everyone is different and unique.
The screen returns to a video of the boy.
Days are good, and some are too much for me. I don't like loud and busy places. I cover my ears and want to run away or yell and tell everyone to be quiet. I need less noise to feel in control of my body. I like to always be moving. I have a hard time holding still. I don't like people to touch my skin sometimes, but everyone is different. My brother doesn't mind if people touch him, and he does not need to wear sunglasses. It is important to know your own body and to understand your body and your 7 senses. Sound. We get the sense of sound through our ears. When the sound is loud, I can't concentrate of anything except stopping the loud noises. I have a really hard time when my mom's turn on the vacuum or blender. Classical music makes me feel relaxed. I like jazz too. It's nearly the same thing. Taste and smell. When we eat or put things in our mouth, we use our chemical senses, taste and smell. Every time you eat, you use these senses. Vision. Our eyes are how we use our sense of vision. Some people like bright lights and lots of things to look at. I get distracted if there's too much to look at. I like things soft colors and organized. When I walk outside, the sun is always so bright that it hurts my eyes and I can't look up. I wear my sunglasses when I'm outside to help. Touch. Some people don't like to be touched, and I don't like my hands to be messy. It makes me feel bad. Touch is your tactile sense, and if you are not used to having things touching your skin, it can make you feel uncomfortable sometimes. Certain clothes, tags, and shoes can really feel not right for an opinion. But for most people, their brain gets used to that uncomfortable clothes. But for me, I just can't think of anything else but the tag that is bothering me. I will tug on it and want to take it off the whole time I'm wearing it. We are trying to teach my hands that it is okay for them to be messy for a little while. The more I can play with things that are a little messy, the more I get used to it, and my brain learns not to focus on it as much. Proprioceptive. You can think of proprioception as your body awareness. You get proprioceptive input every time you get input through your muscles and joints. It sends a message to your brain that says, this is where I am and this is what I'm doing. You get proprioceptive input to help you do everything your body wants to do. Like pushing yourself on a scooter board, carrying something heavy, or even getting dressed. By doing more with your body, you can get more proprioceptive input. This helps me feel better. When I feel like my body is out of control, I like to jump, scooter board, or getting wrapped up tight in a blanket. Proprioceptive input helps me to calm down and organize my body. Vestibular. Your vestibular sense is super complicated but super cool. We all have something in our inner ear that tells the brain whether we are balanced and whether we are moving. It tells our brain whether I am right side up, upside down, moving forward, or moving backward. It is what it tells us that we are dizzy and better stop spinning. If our brain is under responsive to vestibular input, then our body wants to constantly move and spin, and we never get dizzy. If your brain is too responsive to vestibular input, then you feel off balance. It makes it scary to do activities where you have to tilt your head back or your feet are not flat on the ground. Our vestibular sense is very important to help us do everything we need to throughout the day. To figure out what your needs are, it helps to go and work with an occupational therapist. I have 2 of those, one here and one at school. I go to OT 1 time a week. Katie and me and my mom gets to do fun things together when we go. When I leave, my body feels better. It feels like I am in control. We work out our muscles and our brains. Katie and my mom like to talk about things for us to try at home and school. If you have a hard time with your sensory input, there are a lot of things you can do to make it better. There are activities to help your brain learn how to respond differently to sensory input. You can help your body feel calm and in control by getting the sensory input you need throughout the day. Your parents, teachers, and occupational therapists can help. To learn more about sensory processing, check out these websites.
All right. Let me exit out of this. And all right, so as I said, I don't know that there is anyone that could give us a better explanation of what it is to live with a sensory processing disorder than that little guy just did. He was so thorough in going through all of these senses and how his body works with all of those senses, with all of his little sensory systems. So in moving on, we'll go to the next slide, Lauren. And in this slide, it's mainly just text, but there are 2 big circles that have the text in each circle. And we are now going to discuss the 2 types of sensory processing challenges. And the little guy in that video touched on it a little bit. The first sensory challenge is hypersensitivity, and that is being oversensitive or over-responsive, and they call that sensory overload. The other type of sensory processing challenge is hyposensitivity, and that is being undersensitive or under-responsive, and we call those sensory seekers. So you have the 2 types of challenges: hypersensitivity, which is sensory overload, or hyposensitivity, and that is where you are seeking out something to fill those senses. You're not getting enough to fill your senses. So we can go on to the next screen, Lauren. Thank you. In this particular slide, there is a picture of the back of a young male child, and he is holding both of his hands over his ears. And right now we're going to talk a little bit about examples of hypersensitivity, and that is sensory overload. A few examples of children or those with any sensory processing disorder or issue. The hypersensitivity, children and people try to avoid the sensory input because it becomes too overwhelming. It's sometimes even painful or uncomfortable. So a couple examples of that is unable to tolerate bright lights and loud noises, like an ambulance siren, for example. The little guy was talking about the tag in his clothes. So refusing to wear clothing or a shirt with a tag because it feels scratchy or irritating. And there are some with SPD who, even after cutting out all of the tags and labels, they can't wear it just because of the way it feels on their skin. A lot of kids with hypersensitivity issues struggle wearing shoes because the shoes just don't feel right on their skin. Another one is being distracted by background noises that others don't seem to hear. There is a woman by the name of Temple Grandin. She's a very well-known speaker and advocate of those with autism. And Temple Grandin shared in one of her presentations that I attended that one of the most difficult things for her was sitting under, oh, what do you call that lighting? Oh gosh, fluorescent lights, I apologize. Temple Grandin would hear, there is a noise. If you get really, really close to a fluorescent light, you can hear a noise that it makes. But Temple Grandin was so hypersensitive to fluorescent lighting that she said when she sat under fluorescent lights, it felt like there was a helicopter that was hovering right over her head. So it got to a point that one of her coping strategies was asking people to turn off the fluorescent lights if they could. So that's just another example of hypersensitivity. Another example is being fearful of a surprise touch, avoiding hugs and cuddling, even with adults that might be familiar. Being overly fearful of swings and playground equipment, often having trouble understanding where their body is in relation to other objects or other people. So these are people that that seem to be more clumsy, bumping into things. So those are some really good examples of what it is to have hypersensitivity challenge. Lauren, I'm ready for the next one. And in this particular slide, there is a picture of a young male. He's blonde haired and he's wearing a pair of jeans and a green t-shirt. And he is on a trampoline holding onto a safety bar and appears to be jumping up and down. So this slide is going to give us examples of what it is to be hyposensitive. That's undersensitive, underresponsive. Those are our sensory seekers. Children seek more sensory input, not less. So a couple examples of what it is to be hyposensitive is having a constant need to touch people or to touch textures, even when it's not socially acceptable. These are people who struggle with understanding what it is to have personal space. They don't understand that. These are also people who have a very high tolerance, an extremely high tolerance for pain. I remember in my years of teaching when we would do different cooking activities, I had to be extra careful with, if we were in our home ec room, I had to be extra careful in making sure that two of my students who battled hyposensitivity issues stayed away from the stove, because it was nothing for them to, and they never did, but it would be nothing for them to go up and not feel the heat, the pain from the heat if they were to touch a hot stove. These are also people who don't understand their own strength. They're fidgety, they struggle sitting still. They love jumping up and down and moving and bumping and crashing activities. They enjoy deep pressure like bear hugs. They're just keep in mind that they're the sensory seekers. So they are in need of things that will fulfill those senses. They also crave fast spinning or intense movements. They love being tossed in the air, jumping on furniture and trampolines. So interestingly enough, it is not uncommon for those with SPD to experience both challenges. A child's reactions can change from one day to the next, or even within the same day. And that's a bit challenging for us educators, for parents, just trying to find a happy medium and a good balance. It really just depends on a given situation or a given environment. So, all right, Lauren, next slide. On this particular slide, there are 6 text points, and next to each point is a colored circle with the numbers 1 through 6 in each circle. I'm going to go over a few additional facts about sensory processing disorder. Number 1, it is not a diagnosed disability. It does often occur with two well-known disabilities, and that would be autism and ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Although you don't have to have autism or ADHD to have SPD. And that kind of ties in with my number 3 here. So I just did 1 and 3 together. Number 2, and I just talked about this, it is not uncommon for those with SPD to experience both hyper and hyposensitivities. As I said, sometimes both of those can happen in the same day. Number 4, there are no medications for sensory processing disorder. Number 5, there are strategies that can be taught to help children cope with sensory challenges, and we'll go over that a little bit more in just a moment. And number 6, occupational therapist, as the little guy in the video told us, OTs is the acronym for that. Those therapists often work with kids with sensory issues. And there is something called a sensory diet that is a very common form of sensory integration therapy that OTs will present to help a child overcome their issues or their sensory challenges. All right, let's go on to the next one, Lauren. There is text only on this particular slide, and the colors on the text are orange, white, and black. So what is a sensory-friendly environment? A sensory-friendly environment is a welcoming, safe, and judgment-free setting where children can, number 1, be exactly who they are. Number 2, they can freely express their appreciation for the arts without a fear of being asked to leave a venue. Number 3, they can utilize resources and strategies to cope with their sensory challenges. And number 4, they can practice their coping strategies in a community setting rather than the comfort zones of home or school or their classroom. So just elaborating on this a little bit, and I will share a personal story with you. When I was the music teacher at Litzinger, I wrote a grant every year to take all of the students, because I taught the whole school. I worked Litzinger, where I taught, was a self-contained building. And so all of the kids at Litzinger were of differing abilities. The one time that I took a group of our kids with autism to the symphony, it was a really tough experience because there were some children who sat behind us that were not necessarily accepting and kind of my students with disabilities. They made very much fun of who they were and their actions. And our kids were shushed. There was one little guy who he was one of my hyposensitive kiddos, and he spent a lot of time sitting in his seat, rocking back and forth, trying to fulfill that sensory system that was lacking the sensory input. And, kids were making fun of him. There was one of their teachers who asked us if I could please take him outside to the lobby so that he wouldn't disrupt their experience. So one of the reasons that I am such a huge proponent about sensory friendly environments is because no child should be judged for who they are. No person should be judged for who they are. And this little guy was obviously using a strategy to help him adapt to his lack of sensory input. His strategy was rocking and flapping his hands, but to someone else, that's a disruption. So I'm grateful for the opportunities for sensory friendly environments so that, again, my children, all those who have any sort of sensory processing issue, can be exactly who they are. And they can use whatever strategies they need to cope with their challenges. It's another, it's one thing, as I talked about, my number 4 was the comfort zones of home and school and classroom. And being able to generalize those coping strategies that we as educators or parents or caregivers work with teaching children. It's a great opportunity for them to be able to practice those strategies and to use resources, to use the resources that are provided to help them cope with their challenges. Okay, Lauren, I'm ready for the next slide. On this slide, there is also text, but there are 4 colorful squares with information in each of the squares. The colors are blue, aqua, a darker green, and a lighter green. So what are some of the adaptations, accommodations, and resources that we can provide or that should be provided in a sensory-friendly environment? Number 1, there are adaptations and modifications that are made to every sensory-friendly environment. And it just depends on the particular setting, whether it's a movie theater, a musical venue, a big gymnasium. There are adaptations and modifications, just depending on what the setting is, that should be made to every sensory-friendly environment. Now, number 2, it is impossible to adapt an environment to meet the needs of every child with SPD or any sensory challenge. However, we do the best that we possibly can to meet the general needs. Number 3, there may be limitations on environmental modifications, for example, sounds and lights, but that depends on each individual venue. Stages St. Louis, who they've done a sensory-friendly production for the last, I believe, 6 years. Obviously, last year with the pandemic, there was not a production, but you're not going to be able to completely adapt the lighting, because obviously the actors and the actresses need the lighting to see where they are on stage and what they're doing. But we try and make as many modifications as we possibly can to meet the needs of those with sensory challenges. And then resources, number 4, the last one, resources are provided to assist children in implementing coping strategies for sensory input that is overstimulating. And we'll talk about that in just a moment here. Lauren, I'm ready for the next slide. So right now, this slide just has text, and I'm going to give you some examples of adaptation and accommodation resources. The next slide. On this slide is a picture of a pair of red and black ear covering headphones. One of the resources that we can use to help those with sensory processing issues is to give them noise canceling headphones. Now, these headphones do not actually eliminate noise altogether. They just really reduce the noise level that the ear processes. So they can still hear, they can still participate without being overstimulated by the sounds around them. And I know when I did the consulting for the St. Louis Symphony, it was wonderful because they provided noise canceling headphones for the students. There are some students, there are some people who know their limits, and they will even bring their own noise canceling headphones. But if you are a venue that is providing a sensory friendly environment, it's always great to have these headphones available. Next slide, please. On this slide, there is a picture of a child's hand squeezing a squishy ball with many multicolored tiny balls that are inside the squishy ball. There is something called fidgets, and fidgets are self-regulation tools that can be used to help with calming, focus, attention, and active listening. They can also be used to promote tactile input that remember we talked tactile is that sense of feeling that the touching sense. Fidgets can be used to promote tactile input for students who are hyposensitive, who may need a little bit more of that sensory input. And again, in all of the organizations where I have done the sensory awareness training, they've provided fidgets. When at the symphony, it was really quite cute because the symphony presented Peter and the Wolf, and we found little squishy wolves that we gave to each child, and it was pretty great to sit back and watch how much those kids use those fidgets during the performance from the orchestra. So, okay, next slide. There in this slide, there is a picture of a brown door with a blue metal sign hanging on the door. The white letters on the blue sign say quiet room. One of the great resources to have in any sensory friendly environment is a quiet zone or a quiet room. And this is a safe place for those who might be struggling with a sensory issue to go when they need to completely remove themselves from sensory stimulation altogether. When they have tried everything they can within the sensory friendly environment and it's not working and they are experiencing such overload, they can completely and safely remove themselves from all stimulation and go to this quiet zone or this quiet place. And generally a quiet zone or a quiet room has limited stimuli. So that would be lighting, sound activity. Usually if it's a child, they are accompanied by a staff member. And that staff member is great in helping them to implement their strategies to get them through that tough time. You can stay in the quiet room as long as you need to, and then you can return to the event when you feel that you're ready. So that's another beauty of a sensory friendly environment, because in a generalized setting, again, those who are at a performance are not big fans of someone getting up and down and going back and forth, because it's a disruption to their enjoyment of a concert or a performance or a production. So, okay, I think I'm ready for the next one. Now, I believe that Lauren is going to open up the floor for questions. That is the end of my presentation, and I am happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Paula.
Yes.
I learned a lot. So that was very, very helpful for me. I think that, first of all, let me introduce myself a little bit. So I am Lauren Diamond, as Megan mentioned earlier. I do work at the Mildred Lane Kemper Art Museum at Washington University. And I am in charge of the frontline staff in our membership program. I am a late 30s white cis woman. I have my brown hair pulled back into a bun, and I'm wearing glasses and a yellow sweater. And behind me are some artworks and trinkets that are special to me. Oh, let's see. Can I do this? Can we see ketchup and mustard are laying in bed? I should introduce them as they were in my bio. Laying in the bed, I have their 2 dachshunds. So yeah, I do have some questions for you, but while I have questions, I'm hoping that anybody that's here in the audience also has questions. So as Megan mentioned, please feel free to insert those into the Q&A, because I would love to pepper those in to our conversation. So please, I'll try and pay attention to that, but let me go ahead and chat with Paula a little bit about some questions that I have as somebody who manages the frontline staff at an art museum, and how this can best work in cultural institutions. I know that, you know, where I work, we have a relatively newly formed diversity, equity, inclusion, access, and justice committee, who's focusing on increasing our performance in all of those ways. But something that I think that many institutions, big and small, run into are budget hangups whenever they're thinking about the best ways to expand all of their accessible opportunities. And so if you were an organization with a smaller budget or with a budget that was limited when it came to accessibility, what are 2 or 3 different initiatives that you think would give a place the biggest bang for its buck when it's exploring sensory friendly improvements to its space?
You know, I think one of the most important things is to make sure that those with any sort of sensory processing challenge, and again, I go back to children, make sure that they have access to the items that will help them to adapt to their surroundings. And, you know, a quiet zone. A quiet zone virtually costs nothing. It's finding a space within your space that you can designate as a quiet zone. Make sure that there's just quiet lighting. We actually created a quiet zone. I go back to the symphony presentation, to the sensory friendly concert that the symphony presented. So we actually did that at the JCCA, which is the Jewish Community Center that is out in, I believe it's Maryland Heights. And the room that they gave us for the quiet zone, it was wonderful, but the lighting, it was all those bright fluorescent lights. So I brought in just a nice little table lamp. We turned the lights off in the room, and I brought in a table lamp, and it was perfect for those kids who needed to access that room. You know, buy a few sets of those noise canceling headphones. They're not that expensive, but they make a world of difference to those who are overstimulated. And the same with those little fidgets. You can go to the dollar store and buy different fidgets that kids can just hang on to for whatever purpose they need. If it's to, you know, fill a sensory need, if it's needed for a calming effort. But I think it's most important to give them access to things that will help them have the greatest experience, help them to adapt to that environment.
Great. You did kind of mention this in your presentation and recently, that a lot of these accommodations that you speak of, you're speaking of in the sense of children and how they best would respond, you know, during maybe a sensory processing episode. But I am curious, are there similar practices or similar best practices that apply to adults with the same conditions, or if not, what are those differences?
That's a great question. So children tend to struggle more noticeably with sensory issues than adults do. And many children who have sensory processing disorder find that their symptoms lessen or even disappear over time. But sensory issues can continue and exist in adulthood. It's usually to a lesser degree. Those who have lived with autism or sensory processing disorder for a longer amount of time are probably better able to self-advocate as they get older. So there's a good chance that they really know what they need to help with their sensory issues. Younger children, though, however, are counting on parents and teachers and caregivers to help them learn coping strategies and just to help them best experience any sort of event or situation.
Yeah, that leads me to another thought that, you know, again, as I think about training my frontline staff and making sure that they have the resources, and I will certainly be going over this PowerPoint with them so that they know kind of the qualities and attributes to look for someone who might have a sensory processing disorder. Right. But I guess the question that I have is it most appropriate to proactively offer any of the accommodations that you have available to somebody, or do you rely on the person or the chaperone with the sensory processing disorder to come to you to request anything?
I think it's always really important for people to know in advance what accommodations you are willing to make, what that you actually do have some resources that might help those with sensory issues enjoy their experience a bit better. So people are going to be more eager to come and be a part of an experience, be a part of an event, if number one, they know that they're going to be accepted. Number two, if they know that there are some resources that will make it a more enjoyable experience for them or a more tolerable experience for them. So I don't think it's something that needs big, broad advertising and broadcasting, but I think it's important for people to know if you need, we have this, this, and this if you need it. So.
One of the things that I saw that I really look forward to implementing in our space is the pre-visit expectations guide on how people can best understand how to visit. Yeah. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about those and how that can best help to accommodate people to before their visit.
So there is something called a social story, and a social story is it's a story that it was created by I believe she was a speech therapist, and I apologize if I'm not giving her the right credentials, but her name was Carol Gray, and she created something called a social story. And a social story basically uses words and images to explain a concept, social interactions, behavior, and it helps those with SPD or those with any sort of sensory challenge to better understand what's going to happen or what's to come, so they can more appropriately interact. We used social stories every day in the classroom, especially if we were going to be going out to like any sort of a community outing. So this is where we're going. This is what you might encounter. And there were pictures and words. If this happens, how can you handle this? If a noise is too loud, what is a strategy that you can implement? So those social stories are really, they're a key resource. And I know that Stages created a social story to send out to schools that they knew were coming, so that teachers and parents could prepare ahead of time. Same with the symphony. We created a social story that we shared so that, again, it's that preparation in advance, letting them know what's to come. And, you could just create a simple social story or a simple guide of what to expect. Does that answer your question, Lauren? I feel like I kind of rambled on there.
No, that's exactly. I wanted first just a general explanation of the types of content that's inside of there, and yeah, I think that's super helpful because I think setting expectations early, and like you mentioned, letting people know of the accommodations available to them prior to arriving are a great way to make a person or a group of people feel comfortable prior to their arrival so that they know that there are people and amenities available for them when they show up.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We have a question from the audience, and it says, how do you structure your training for frontline staff versus actors and artists before a sensory friendly performance? So I know that, my frontline staff would very possibly encounter, a family or, a small group of people that just walked in the door, and it's more on the spot accommodations as opposed to preparing ahead of time. So I'm curious, how would you structure that training for frontline staff and how they would encounter someone arriving with sensory processing disorder?
I think it's important for as I talked just a couple of minutes ago, having some of those resources, those accommodations in place, so that if someone were to come in and share with your frontline staff, just to come out of nowhere, like you weren't prepared. We have a child with autism, or we have a child who has a sensory challenge. Your frontline staff can then say, hey, so we've got, if you need this, we have this. If you need this, we have this. We've got the resources available to help make this experience, to make, help make this experience better. Obviously, if you're not prepared for someone who has those challenges coming in, you may not have a quiet zone set up, but you might think about, if this child needs to be completely removed from the sensory stimulation for a little while, where is a place that they could go to just feel safe for a few minutes? So again, I think on each organization or institution, it's getting those resources and a plan in place for when someone does come in who has a sensory processing disorder, or who has autism, or just general sensory issues.
I also think, again, what I'm excited to share with my staff for the slides that are examples of the hyper and hyposensitivity. Just because, if you're not somebody familiar with SPD, you may not see those actions as something that is showcasing their need for either more or less sensory.
Mhm.
And so knowing kind of what to look for frontline staff, whether that's, my staff at the desk or staff on the floor that's moving around, and they can kind of see people. So I think that's one of the things I'm very excited about, because it just allows them to be more anticipatory of their visitors and patrons' needs as they're in the space.
And I think too, having the knowledge of what a sensory processing disorder is, understanding what hypersensitive is compared to hyposensitive. We are so quick to look at a child who might be tantruming as just a bratty child, or, oh, how disrespectful. When in reality, that child might be having what we call a sensory meltdown. And a sensory meltdown is when you just, everything just becomes too much and you melt down. It's very possible that child isn't just being a little stinker. The child is reacting to how his or her body feels with sensory overload. And when you have no resources or no accommodations that are set in place to help them deal, it becomes a sensory meltdown. So it's really important for organizations, for institutions to really get a plan in place for those who need those adaptations and modifications.
And I think that we train our staff with, visitors who have low vision, that, you look for people who are squinting or who are getting very close to labels and things like that. And there's kind of a one-to-one understanding that when someone does this, then maybe this is the accommodation they need. But that's not, I don't think, the same with the sensory processing disorder, which is why it's really helpful to kind of get, and as you mentioned, that they don't all, showcase themselves in the same way. That it's important for people to kind of understand that and be more thoughtful about why someone might be exhibiting behaviors that they don't understand in a space.
Very true. It's, we all know when a child with Down syndrome walks in, there is a specific look that a child with Down syndrome has. You don't have to guess. Does that child have Down syndrome? The visual is there. When a child who is a child or an adult, either or, is physically handicapped, they may come in with their braces. They may come in a wheelchair. They may come in using a walker. You've got the visual. You don't see sensory processing disorder. You see it in the behavior. You might see it in the hand flapping or the rocking, because that is such a common way for someone to fulfill that that lack of sensory input that they're not receiving. So just a lot of things to keep in mind. I have many resources that I'm going to share with Megan. I will be sending those to her probably by the end of the day today, but I have several, resources, some different sites for people to check into. There is a one site, and give me just a moment. I had it written down here. I apologize. There it is. It is called Sensory Kid. I believe it's sensorykid.com or sensorykid.org, but it is a mom of a child with autism who created this site, and it's wonderful. She gives so much information and so many great resources of figuring out where to start with creating a sensory friendly environment. And it's not only a great resource for parents, it's become a great resource for teachers and caregivers and really anyone who's interested in creating or enhancing a sensory friendly environment. So I will be sure to include that in my list of resources that I send to Megan that she will share with everyone.
We have a great question from Sarah here in the Q&A, and it says, a lot of the focus of your presentation has been on those with sensory issues as occasional audience visitors, but are there any additional things to keep in mind if dealing with sensory issues among more involved participants, for example, a performer or an ongoing student or staff member?
That's a great question. I highly encourage institutions to have a plan in place. Make it a part of your organization's strategic plan to always have something available for accommodating those with sensory issues. And I hope I'm answering this question correctly. I sit on a task force through a wonderful organization called Different Dynamics. Different Dynamics is a center for special music education that was founded by Jessica Ingraham. And if you don't know her, you should know her. She's incredible. But Jessica has started a task force on sensory friendly environments. And one of the things that we are talking about is, what do we need to do to make any venue, any event space, any organization just naturally a sensory friendly environment, so that there don't have to be all of these big ornate plans like, ooh, we're going to do this one time a year event. What do we as a society need to do to make our environments more inclusive of those with sensory issues? And I think if you think about it, I would have been sitting here clicking my pen nonstop. That's a sensory issue that I have, right? How many of you are sitting there bouncing your knee? I do that a lot too. I'm a sensory seeker. There's some reason why when I'm bouncing my knee, I'm not getting the sensory input I need. Bottom line, because we are all sensory beings and we are ruled by our senses. We need to do better for those who have the extreme challenges and the extreme issues. We as a society need to do better in creating an environment that is naturally sensory friendly. I hope that answered that question.
I see Megan, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. We work with a lot of venues and a lot of organizations that use a lot of volunteers. So it might be something like a volunteer usher that comes, every third Tuesday, or, things like that. People that are oftentimes frontline. They might be the person at the front door or an usher or at the box office, but they are not receiving all of the training as a staff member and that sort of thing. So what do you suggest for venues and organizations to make sure that their volunteers are just as trained as everyone else? We find that there are a lot of places that have that core group of people that are really into the accessibility, and they go to all of these things and they know all of this stuff. But when we do audio description, our patrons will get somewhere and they'll ask someone about audio description and they'll say, oh, what is that? I don't know, do we have that? Or, things that we know they have, but it just hasn't trickled all the way down. So
Indeed. And we just had this discussion last night in our task force meeting. We are going to be creating an awareness and education campaign. And that's, it's not an easy fix. It's not an easy fix. When I went to the symphony, they required all volunteers to go through the sensory awareness training. And it's wonderful because now anywhere these volunteers go, they have the knowledge of sensory processing disorder. They have the information that they need wherever they might go. And let's hope that's going to be a ripple effect, right? So that if that volunteer who sat through my training goes to volunteer at another organization, they know the information. They know, they have the knowledge of what it takes to adapt the environment, what resources, what adaptations are necessary. But I highly encourage organizations to give their volunteers some sort of training so that we are all on the same page. It's going to take a long time. Like I said, it's not just an easy fix, but we're getting a good start. We're getting a good start.
And it depending on sometimes the size of your organization and your staff base or your volunteer base, that depending on that, sometimes I find that either, smaller 10-minute trainings that, you can do in your morning meetings or before, someone starts a shift or something like that works really great. Or if it's easier to try and get everyone or most everyone together for one large 1 hour training, and you're talking about, SPD, and you're talking about, other accessibility accommodations, and you're going over a broader type of subject. But, I usually try and allow myself a good 10 or 15 minutes once a month that I'm trying to do smaller trainings with my staff, because, I have staff that work 2 or 3 hour shifts sometimes, and I don't see them, maybe about once a week. So I need to catch them at a time. I can't do an hour training. So I do think that sometimes just, little snippets of information, and then I just check off every time I've talked to somebody, so I know that that person has gotten that content from me.
Yeah, I think that's great, Lauren. And, right now we as a society, we're so caught up in just the busyness of, oh, I got to get this done. I got to get this done. I got to get this done. And it's so hard for people to think outside their comfort zones. This isn't in a lot of people's comfort zones, but it needs to be, because sensory processing disorder and those who battle sensory challenges are everywhere. So we really need to keep talking about it. And what do we need to do to make our environments naturally more accessible?
Angela, I see you have your hand raised. Did you have a question?
Yes, so I have a question. It's actually from Tori with Shakespeare Festival, but so her question is, many of these examples are for indoor traditional venues. Any recommendations for accommodations at a free outdoor venue where people can walk up and leave as they desire?
That's a really great question. And I've not done any, I have not done any of my trainings for any outside venues, although I would love to do that. That would be even a greater challenge for me to expand my information about adapting an outside setting. I think, Tori, one of the best things to have available would be those noise canceling headphones, and to have you know, the fidgets. I mean, I think that would be a great start. Obviously, it's even more difficult to control the noise setting or a volume per se when you're outdoors. But I think having those hands-on resources would be a really great start. And I'm grateful for your question, because I now am challenged to research appropriate adaptations for an outdoor setting. So I would love your information, and I will definitely get back to you as I get more information and more knowledge about that.
I only have one more question for you, and it also kind of relates similarly to a non-traditional venue. You know, this past 20 months, things have changed quite a bit. A lot of institutions have moved their programming to online programming. And, you know, if places are like the Kemper, there will probably be some form of online content for people, you know, in the future, even when we were able to safely meet in person. And so I'm curious, what are some ways that organizations can make their online spaces more friendly and accessible for those who have sensory needs?
You know, I think it goes back to Lauren. It's really impossible to adapt any environment to meet the individual specific needs. I think the making the online spaces more friendly and accessible is going to come more from the home setting. So again, I'll go back to different dynamics. Jessica has continued to do a variety of online group music activities. And it's been great because you have to sign up for that. And it's easier when it's a sign up situation, because then you can give them all of those pre-materials. Here's what we're going to be doing, so that parents, guardians, caregivers can get them ready, can prepare them. It may be changing the lighting in your home, but the site that I told you about, what was it? I'm so sorry. I wrote it, Sensory Kid. This woman has a blog that it's a wealth of information on educational and sensory friendly online resources. So be sure and check that out as well, because there are sites that are catering to those with sensory issues and have adapted the settings on the screens to meet the needs of those with sensory issues. So that blog will be included in the resources that I share with Megan to share with everyone.
Great.
So yeah, it's like I say, it's nice if you can get information out ahead of time, so that those in the home can do prep for whatever online activity or event they're going to attend.
Makes sense. Looks like we have one more question from the audience, and it says, I'm curious, what kind of training do you do for your audience to make the space and event more inclusive to those with sensory needs, and to not have the experience that your students had that you had described earlier at the symphony?
I wish I had a magic wand. That is up to each of the individual institutions and organizations. And again, that's going to be a big work in progress, because ideally, I would love it if you could start every production, performance, concert with, hey, just be kind. Those around you, everybody's different. Just be kind. Just be accepting that not everybody is going to express their appreciation like you are. But we've got a lot of work to do, because we are trying to get the heads of some of these organizations just to be open to creating a sensory friendly environment, much less us tapping into the general audience to tell them what they need to do. It's tough, and like I say, we have a lot of work to do.
I think it's been almost my experience that these sensory friendly performances or tours or events are almost set aside at a special time, which in a way is good in a sense that it does also help with the sensory inputs that people are getting. It's not crowded, it's not loud, it's not busy. But also, as you talked about, these kind of safe zones or these comfort zones, it doesn't really necessarily, acclimate people to spaces where the public will be if they're doing something in a private set aside time. So I see maybe both the benefit and the drawback of doing, performances like that.
You're so right, Lauren. Ideally, in an ideal world, I would love if every place was a sensory friendly environment so that we could all be inclusive, right? It's a dream. But we have a lot of work to do. I know I sound like a broken record, but we have a lot of work to do. But awareness and education is key in getting us to those what's the word I'm looking for? Help me out, Lauren. And just in helping us to accomplish that work. It's if you don't know, you don't know. And it's our job as special educators, as advocates for those with any sort of different ability. It's our job to make people aware, to educate people.
And we talked about setting expectations. I think, not that the Kemper does this, but I would love to look forward to this at some point in our future. If we offer a sensory friendly tour or experience, that we have a welcome sign at the desk that says, we're excited to welcome, this group today for our sensory friendly tour. So not only am I excited to welcome the group, but it's also an announcement to other visitors, if it's happening during the course of the day, that we will have a moment of our day where we're having sensory friendly activities. And so it also maybe makes people be more thoughtful about their time and their surroundings.
I agree. And it also sparks good conversation that gives you the opportunity to educate and to make others aware. If they see a sign, well, what is that all about? Boom, there's your opportunity to share what you know about sensory processing disorder or what it is to have sensory challenges. And now you've shared your information and it's that ripple effect.
Yeah.
We need to spread it. And like I say, hopefully in time, all of society will catch it, right?
Agreed. Paula, it's been really, really nice talking to you. And I really look forward to these other resources you're going to share with us.
Right.
I think Megan has maybe some announcements that I want to make sure I turn it over to her before we're done.
Thank you, Lauren. It's been a joy to be with all of you, and call me if there is anything I can help you with your different organizations, or if you want me to do a training for your people. I love to spread the news.
Wait by that phone. I'm calling you soon, Paula.
Please do. I'd be honored.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Paula and Lauren. That was wonderful. I do have just some last minute announcements here, and one is really exciting. So there's our IDEA Award nominations are now open as of this moment. The nomination registration form is opening right now, and it will hit the Facebook page in about 15 minutes. So in January, we'll be having our second IDEA Awards to celebrate organizations, individuals, initiatives, supporters, and workplaces that exemplify our values of inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. So keep an eye on the Facebook ACAC group page. If you're not part of our group, remember, it's facebook.com/groups/ACACSTL. And if you head over there in about 15 minutes, there will be a post that will pop up with the registration form. It will also be in the resources that I send out, and we'll put it on the Mind's Eye Facebook page. I'll send it to you. We'll do lots of things with it. So those awards will be presented at our next ACAC, which will be in January. So notice there are 5 categories I mentioned this year. individuals, organizations, initiatives, supporters, and workplaces. So keep an eye out for those. Oops. Another announcement, I will be hosting another audio description training for Mind's Eye volunteers. We would love to have you all join us. It will be January 11th, 12th, and 13th. We're doing evenings this time. It will be virtual. It is via Zoom again. So that will be 6 to 8 p.m. on all 3 of those days. Those are weekdays. So we're mixing it up each time we do it. So those are weekday evenings from 6 to 8. It is over all 3 days. Of course, you can take those skills back to your own organizations, but the training is designed for you to become a Mind's Eye audio describer. And we will provide audio description. We always provide audio description for all types of different venues and things. We do live theater, sporting events, meetings, museums, webinars, galleries, all sorts of things. We are particularly looking to diversify our AD team. You hear me preach about this a lot. Yes, we need to diversify so we can represent more cultural and ideological backgrounds. And we are looking for groups, people from these groups or anyone. Last time I read off all these groups and someone said, well, I'm a white woman. Is it okay if I come? Yes, yes, we still want you. However, we are looking specifically for people who are Black, Hispanic, and or Latinx, Native American, Asian American, people who are Jewish, members of the LGBTQ plus community, people with disabilities, also people who are fluent in Spanish and or Bosnian would be spectacular, or anything else, but particularly Spanish or Bosnian would be great. So we are really excited to offer another training for audio description. We are really expanding our audio description venues, so we want to make sure that we have the right people for each job. And then also coming in February, date to be determined, we are going to have we as in Mind's Eye are going to have an informational meeting specifically for venues or theater companies, galleries, museums, just about audio description. It's not a training, it's just this is what we do. This is why audio description is important. It's going to be more of a Q&A, not a webinar sort of situation. It's going to be just an informational thing. So please be on the lookout for that. Let me know if you're interested in coming. Also, our last announcement, we are accepting ACAC sponsorships. Now there's Laura's email address, elfady@mindseyeradio.org. So please let her know yes, it does cost money to have these events, even though they are still on Zoom currently. So we are looking for sponsorships specifically for to cover our ASL and our CART captioner and our audio describer, and an honorarium for speakers we'd love to have at some point, which we don't have currently. So those would all be spectacular. And of course, we want to thank our sponsors, Lighthouse for the Blind, and Mind's Eye is proud to be a United Way of Greater St. Louis Safety Net member agency. And then we'd like to thank Lauren and Paula for being here today, our ASL interpreters from LAMP, David and Candace, our CART interpreter from Here Inc., LaDonna, and our audio describer from Mind's Eye, Tori. And thanks to all of you. Thanks for coming. Our next ACAC will be January 26th for our IDEA Awards. And it's 9:59, so I think that's the end, guys. So unless anybody has any last minute remarks, I'm just want to say goodbye and thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you again.